All right, guys. So today is the 14th of September, 2020. Hope you guys had a good weekend. And today we're going to move on to our first unit. We've kind of covered some basic geography things. We would do some other activities in a normal school year, but they're very much dependent on pen and paper. So we're going to move on. And what we're going to go on into is our first real unit, if you want to call it that, and that's on Egypt. And you see a picture in the background. I took that just so you guys are aware. A little showing off, I guess. It's the Nile River, and if you know anything about ancient Egypt, you know that their pharaohs were buried early on in pyramids or other tombs, and then after a significant amount of tomb raiding, they were put into a hidden valley called the Valley of the Kings, and that is a picture of the Valley of the Kings. It's just on the other side of those hills that you see. All right, so we're just going on. And here we go. Yeah. So for do now, obviously we do know a do now. We've done it this morning, but what I would like for you to consider as you have done it is, what ways do rivers help people? How can they hurt people? All right. Now, if we were in class, we'd have a discussion about it, but I'm going to go ahead and hopefully some of your short answers that you've done reflect this. But rivers are helpful because they provide clean water. If they're freshwater rivers, they provide a mode of transportation. Sailing is always much easier than going up and down on foot. They can provide forms of protection if they're wide enough. They are, like a barrier from invasion. They can provide ways for us to move our waste, or human waste, right? That is a problem. Disease is by far the biggest killer in human history. I know that seems kind of straightforward, but we often ignore that fact. It can provide sources of food, both by the fish or other animals that may live inside the water, but also animals that come to the river to bathe or to drink. They can be hunted. And then the way we're going to most notably talk about it with Egypt is it can provide for crops. And it can provide for crops in two ways. One is the obvious way of providing fresh water for watering, the crops. But the other is through flooding, and something that we call the miracle of the Nile. Every year, the Nile predictably, reliably floods. And as it floods, it lifts up from the bottom of the river silt. And silt is the dead stuff on the bottom of a river. It's dead animals, dead plants. It's waste from animals that live in the water. It is minerals in different dirts. And when it gets deposited, it's very rich in nutrients, and it's very good for plants to grow in. So the Egyptians reliably could count on the flooding to be rather gentle, which is unique. We're going to see that with China, but also it deposited the silt on the ground and made it very rich for farming. Remember, Egypt is a desert, so anything that's good for growing plants is going to be beneficial. All right, so some key terms. These are things I'd like you to understand and know. Cataracts, pharaoh, dynasty, and bureaucracy. Now, cataracts are rapids or small waterfalls found in a river. A pharaoh is the king of both Upper and Lower Egypt, and you're going to read about what is Upper and what is Lower Egypt. Be careful with it. It is a tricky term. Dynasty is a family of rulers where the rules pass down within the family, usually father to son, but not always necessarily. And then lastly, bureaucracy. It's a way to administer or to conduct a government with officials and procedures. We have a bureaucracy, right? Certain people conduct certain or take care of certain tasks within the government, and there's rules that regulate that. On the left, you probably have seen that before. That is the burial mask of King Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh of all of Egypt, even though he was quite insignificant. And he's famous because his tomb was the only tomb ever discovered undisturbed. It is quite a small tomb. It is it's only 4 rooms. Some tombs are quite massive, as you'll see in some photographs later on. But it is important because it gave us an understanding of just what a tomb, when it was sealed up thousands of years ago, actually would have looked like. All right. Now, this is a point that we really need to keep in mind at all times, that water is key to all civilizations. Many, not all, but many great civilizations spring up on or near rivers. The reason being, as we already talked about with the do now, food, fishing, hunting, watering good soil for crops, and drinking water. Transportation, it is always easier to sail somewhere than to walk somewhere. And protection, it creates a natural barrier. Protecting yourself is always key. Egyptian geography. Now we can see Egypt there in the upper right-hand corner of the map. It is red. It is located in northeastern Africa. Its capital city is Cairo, one of the largest cities in the world. It is home to approximately 95 million people. It has a hot and dry, it is a hot and dry country, hot and dry climate. It is almost entirely part of the Sahara Desert. Almost the entire population of Egypt lives along the banks of the Nile River or along its coastlines. It borders two quite large, important seas. To the north, the Mediterranean Sea. And to the east, the Red Sea. Kind of looks like a crab's claw if you look at it kind of carefully. The Nile River has cataracts along it, so sailing up or down it, if you were to sail up and down, you would encounter these natural barriers. So the barrier has a barrier. To the west of Egypt, towards that large country that it borders, which is Libya. It is the Sahara Desert, and the Sahara Desert also to the south to that large country, which is Sudan. All right. It is also shares a small border with Israel off of that, kind of like that little tail-looking thing sticking off the top right corner of Israel, off of Egypt, which is the Sinai Peninsula. That's where it borders Israel. We'll talk more about Israel later on in the school year. All right. Here's a map just to kind of give you a concept of where it is, not that far from the Middle East, which is technically part of the Asian continent, not that far from Europe. It is about 23 degrees north, so it runs right along the Tropic of Cancer and a bit above the equator. All right, so here we go. Here, a little bit more detailed map. I'm going to pull up the highlighter tool, so bear with me. All right, and so we have its capital of Cairo right here, right at the base of the Nile Delta. Giza, which is where the pyramids are, Alexandria. Now, if you know anything from maybe middle school geography or middle school history, you might remember that there's the seven wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and two were actually located in Egypt. One is the lighthouse at Alexandria, which you can go see the base of still. That's actually right in the sea. And then the only one that still exists today are the Great Pyramids of Giza, right here. The Sinai Peninsula, which I mentioned, the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea. Now, the Nile River is by far the most important feature of Egyptian geography, but it flows south to north. And why is that special? Why am I pointing this out? Almost universally, rivers that are above the equator flow north to south. It is believed that an earthquake millions of years ago actually reversed the flow of the river, sending it this way. So it's quite unique. So when we talk about upstream, downstream, this is upstream, this is downstream. This is Upper Egypt, this is Lower Egypt. Keep that in mind. It is very tricky, all right? So along the river, we have some settlements. The most important throughout history is Luxor. All right, Luxor, it was the city in which the Valley of the Kings was attached to, if you want to call it that way. This is where the bodies of the pharaohs would be sailed down to and then buried over here in the Valley of the Kings. This is all desert. The city of Siwa is on an oasis, a place where water naturally occurs in the desert. And you can see here the Sinai Peninsula. We're going to talk about two other kind of developments later on. One is the Aswan Dam, which powers through hydroelectricity much of Egypt. And it creates Lake Nasser, named after one of its later presidents. And then we're going to watch the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is incredibly impressive. It connects the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, which means if you were, say, sailing from India, which is down here in the bottom right corner, and going to parts of Europe, instead of having to sail all the way down around Africa, you can simply sail up the Red Sea, cut through, and exit out the Mediterranean Sea. All right. A little bit more detailed map, just simply kind of providing more. You can see that in this map, the darker the green, the flatter the area. Egypt is mostly quite flat. I'm going to point out a couple other features, though, which is the Eastern Desert and the Western Desert. Nothing tricky about where they're located. Just wanted to bring a point to them. All right, so geography and culture. So this is the crown on the left. The crown on the left is the crown of the pharaohs of Egypt. And it's called the Shint, and it has two parts. 1, 2. Now think about what we talked about, Upper and Lower Egypt. The reason it has two parts is because the pharaohs were the first people, the first men, they were men, mostly, not entirely, but mostly men, who ruled over both Upper and Lower Egypt. All right? This crown is symbolic of the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under one ruler, all right? The Shint. Right? The very first pharaoh that we recognize in Egyptian history is Menes, right? And he ruled 5,100 years ago in 3100 BCE. Now, just so you know, we use BCE right here. I'm going to leave this highlighted. And here's why. The old terms of BC and AD are rooted in Christianity. BC meaning before Christ, AD being the Latin term Anno Domini, or a year of our Lord. Now, Christianity is the largest religion in the world. However, 5 out of every 7 people on the planet are non-Christians. So referencing it in terms of Christian history, in terms of Jesus Christ, being his birth being the year zero, is quite difficult for a lot of the world to understand. And so we have, over the past 20, 30 years, as historians, been moving to this BCE CE. BCE simply stands before the Common Era, and CE means the Common Era, with the year zero, as we commonly understand it to be, representing the divide between the two. So everything from zero backwards is BCE, and zero to today, September the 14th, 2020, is CE. Now, pharaohs were seen as living gods. They were perfect in all ways. They had absolute power. All right. They did, though, rule with the help of a bureaucracy. They had people who assisted them, government officials. Now, this picture on the left is from Egypt. And that is so there's this large temple complex called the Temple of Luxor in Luxor. And every pharaoh kind of added on to it. This is Tutankhamun. His wife is just to the right side. This is his very small addition. This is what he was only able to add on to in his very short rule. The longer you ruled, the more you added on. So the social hierarchy, how is society broken down? So there's 5 levels, right? Pharaoh at the top, right below him, priests and nobles. You'll notice that priests are here, indicating that the religion of the Egyptians, polytheism, which we will discuss, was quite important. Scribes, people who could write. Artisans, people who could create items, whether they be baskets or tools. And merchants, people who sold them, were the next. These were the middle class people. Peasant farmers were next, poor farmers who either grew food for small profits or grew food simply to survive on their own. And then finally, slaves. Slaves are usually captured during war. All right, and here's simply a breakdown. Once again, you can see that we use a pyramid because there's fewer people on top, more people on the bottom, right? This one includes unskilled workers as slaves, but this is truly slaves, peasant farmers, artisans, merchants, priests and nobles, and then lastly, the pharaoh on top by himself. All right, now here's what you're going to do. You're going to, in that Google form that I've posted, you're going to open that up, right? And you're going to read the pages I've attached in there, right? So I know it says 2930. That is where you're going to get the notes specifically for this part of the activity, but you're going to read 26 to 30 on your own, right? The very last question is, please identify the 5 different levels within the social hierarchy. You're going to do that. And then you're going to describe the people that were in there. What were their titles? What did their jobs entail? All that kinds of good stuff, right? If I am you, by tomorrow, by Tuesday, I am aware of these 5 levels, and I can place them in order. All right. I'm just saying this is what I would do, because I'm going to reflect it right here in the closing. The question is, if Mr. Torciello gave me a quiz today or tomorrow, would I be able to do well on it? Now, I'm not saying you have a quiz, but anyway, I hope you guys understood all this. If you have any questions, obviously always email me, post comments, get my attention, and we'll go over it. I will do anything I can to help you. And that is it. Thanks, guys.